The Clementine Hall in the Vatican was full. It was filled with princes, powerful politicians, and the quiet shuffling of the press. But even with all those people, the room was deathly quiet. You must understand, this was not the silence of peace. This was the heavy, thick silence that comes just seconds before the thunder cracks across the sky. Everyone felt it. King Charles was there, but he was not just there as a man. You see, he was a symbol. He represented 1,000 years of earthly power, 1,000 years of history. He was the living symbol of an empire that once boasted the sun never set upon it. And he was standing in the Vatican, waiting to meet Pope Leo the Fourteenth and Pope Leo. Well, he was a man who truly did not care about empires at all. This is why the world was watching. This is why the silence was so heavy. Everyone knew Pope Leo was different. He wasn't born into this. He was not a diplomat or a politician dressed in white. He was a simple shepherd, a man of the people. This entire meeting, with all its cameras and ceremony, it was a test. The world was watching to see. Could the old tradition of kings still command the new vision of faith? Those who were in the room said the Pope seemed almost distracted while the king was speaking, reading his formal, prepared remarks about shared history and mutual respect. Pope Leo's eyes were not focused on him. They were wandering. They drifted over the heads of the royal delegation, scanning the back of the great hall. It was clear he was looking for something, or perhaps he was looking for someone. Someone he felt was far more important. King Charles finished his formal remarks. The polite pre-written words about unity and tradition echoed for a moment and then faded. With the easy confidence of a man born into his role, a confidence built over centuries of royal blood, he took one measured step forward, and then he extended his right hand. To most people, it was just a hand, but to Pope Leo, it was everything. The cameras zoomed in, and the world saw what the Pope saw. This was not just a hand, it was a symbol. It was the hand that wore the heavy gold signet ring of his office. It was a hand that had only ever known softness. It signed laws, it commanded armies, it waved to crowds from golden carriages. But it was a hand that had never worked. It had never tilled soil. It had never washed a floor. It had never known what it felt like to be calloused or sore or empty. Pope Leo the Fourteenth looked at that hand. The world saw a pause. The cameras flashed. The king's smile remained, but his eyes began to show the faintest trace of uncertainty. The silence stretched. You see, what the world saw as a pause was, for Pope Leo, a choice. It was a moral decision happening in real time. He was not trying to be rude, he was not trying to create a scandal, he was, in that moment, deciding what his faith truly meant. And he realized he could not bring himself to touch that symbol of worldly power, not when his heart was somewhere else entirely. And so he did not lift his own hand, he did not raise it to meet the king's. Instead, Pope Leo simply looked up from the king's hand and met his eyes directly. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you." But it was also a clear, silent, and devastating refusal of the handshake. It was as if all the air had been pulled from the room, a collective, silent gasp. King Charles, a man trained from birth to master his emotions, did not flinch. He did not pull his hand back in anger. He held his composure, a lifetime of practice taking over. But his eyes betrayed him. They revealed no anger. They revealed something far deeper, something a king is rarely allowed to feel: total, absolute confusion. This was not in the script, this was not in any briefing. Slowly, he retracted his hand, letting it fall empty to his side. The echo of that silence was shattered by the explosion of media. In seconds, the story was out. Before the king had even fully lowered his arm, phones were vibrating in pockets all over the world. The headlines were instant and brutal. "The Pope snubs the king! Royal protocol shattered! Insulted the Vatican!" The world demanded answers. Immediately, the experts began to talk. They rushed onto television. They said it was a political statement. They said it was about old religious disputes between the Church of England and Rome. They spoke of history, of politics, of diplomacy. The smartest minds in the world raced to find the most complicated explanation for what they had just seen. They were all wrong. It wasn't a political insult. It wasn't about history. The Pope wasn't trying to redefine international relations. The media saw a snub. They thought Pope Leo had broken protocol. But they didn't understand. Pope Leo hadn't broken protocol. He had just redefined it. And the real reason was so simple, so human, that all the experts in the world had missed it completely. While the room was still processing the shock, while the king's delegation looked on like statues in a museum, Pope Leo did what no one expected. He turned his back on the king, he turned his back on the princes, the duchesses, and the ambassadors. He turned away from the power, the money, and the cameras. His eyes had found what they were looking for earlier. It was not in the front row. It was far in the back, behind the velvet ropes, hidden by the crowd of ordinary pilgrims who had been allowed to stand and watch. Tucked away in a corner was a small, simple wheelchair. The Pope began to walk. He did not walk quickly, he walked with purpose. A Swiss guard, seeing the Pope move off the official path, stepped forward to clear the way or perhaps stop him. The Pope simply raised his hand, not in blessing but in a gentle gesture to stop the guard. "It is all right," he seemed to say without words. He was on his own. The crowd of pilgrims, seeing the Holy Father walking directly toward them, gasped and parted like the Red Sea. His focus was absolute. He was not just going to greet the crowd, he was going to her. He stopped in front of the wheelchair. In it sat a tiny, frail woman. She looked terrified, as if she had done something wrong. Later, the Vatican would confirm who she was. She was a widow, not from Rome, not from London. She was from a small, poor village in the mountains, a place no one had ever heard of. She had saved her entire life, putting aside a few coins every week for decades, just for this one pilgrimage. She wasn't holding a new souvenir. She was holding a broken rosary. The simple wooden beads were held together with a piece of old string, a testament to a lifetime of prayer. Pope Leo the Fourteenth reached the wheelchair. And then, as the king watched, as the world watched, the Pope knelt. The man who had refused to even lift his hand for a king now lowered his entire body to the cold marble floor. He was not just bending down, he was kneeling. He knelt on the ground before the poor widow. She began to cry. The tears streamed down her wrinkled face as she covered her mouth, overwhelmed, as if she was afraid she was in trouble. The Pope gently, so gently, took her hands. They were trembling. He pried them open, and in her palm was the broken rosary, the wooden beads held together by a simple thread. He looked at it. He looked at it as if it were the most precious jewel on earth. He did not bless her. He did not say a prayer. He simply lifted that broken rosary to his lips, and he kissed it. Then the Pope reached into the belt of his own white cassock. He pulled out his personal rosary. It was beautiful, made of silver and onyx. A gift from his time as a cardinal. It was the one he himself used. He gently wrapped his own papal rosary into her hands, closing her fingers around it, and then he took her broken one. He took the cheap string-bound rosary from her, and as the cameras flashed, he did not hand it to an aide. He did not put it in his pocket. He reverently tucked it deep inside the breast of his own white cassock, placing it right next to his heart. The world had expected the Pope to acknowledge royalty, and in that moment, he did. He had just declared, without a single word, that her lifetime of suffering and faith was worth more than all the gold and all the signet rings of all the kings on earth. The world saw two separate things. They saw an insult, and then they saw an act of charity. They thought one was a political act and the other was a spiritual one. They were wrong. It was not two actions, it was one single lesson. The hidden truth of that day was found in the choice. To understand the Pope, you must understand what he chose between. The hand of the king represented power. It was the power that takes and commands. It was the power that is inherited, the power of bloodlines and armies and wealth. It was the power of the world. The hands of the widow represented something else entirely. They represented faith, the kind of faith that endures and perseveres. Her broken rosary was a symbol of a life of suffering, a life of prayer, a life of holding on when the world gave you every reason to let go. In that one moment, Pope Leo the Fourteenth rejected the power that takes, and he knelt before the power that endures. He was challenging a belief that is as old as time. He was challenging the idea that the church needs the powerful to protect it. He was challenging the idea that faith needs the approval of kings and billionaires to be valid. He was showing the king, and all of us, that the true strength of the church, the true foundation of faith, does not come from the rich and the powerful. It comes from the broken hearts, the calloused hands, and the quiet prayers of the humble. Just like that woman, the Pope was not fighting the king. He was fighting indifference. He was fighting the empty, cold idea that ceremony matters more than people. He was fighting the belief that a king's schedule is more important than a widow's tears. The shockwave from that moment didn't just rattle the room. It split the entire world, and the division was immediate and fierce. The reaction was like a deafening roar. Within the hour, the experts were nearly apoplectic on every television channel. They weren't just annoyed, they were furious. Royal commentators, esteemed historians, and polished political analysts, they all spoke with one voice of a diplomatic catastrophe, a shameful and calculated insult. They used words like sacrilege and unprecedented disrespect. They debated for hours and hours, not just about the insult to a single king, but the breach of 1,000 years of sacred tradition. You must understand, they were angry because their entire world is built on these very rules, on these symbols of hierarchy and power. The Pope had just shown them, and the entire world, that their revered symbols, the handshakes, the titles, the crown, were as fragile as glass. He had proven them hollow in a single silent moment. They saw only the broken protocol. They were blind to the reason because their eyes are trained to look only at thrones, not at people. But the common people, oh, they saw something else entirely. The ordinary men and women, the ones watching on their small televisions in their quiet living rooms, clutching their own rosaries. Especially the seniors, the grandparents, the ones who truly knew what a lifetime of quiet struggle felt like. They understood it all. They understood it in their bones. They didn't need a single expert to explain it to them. They didn't see an insult. They saw the gospel. They saw the truth. They looked at their own hands, hands wrinkled with age, hands that had raised children, cooked countless meals, and clasped together in prayer in the dark, lonely hours of the night. They saw their own quiet sacrifices, their own invisible heartaches, their own tired bodies. And they saw them for the first time, being seen, being honored. The Pope, in honoring that one widow, had honored them all. He had declared that their quiet lives of faith mattered more than all the parades of the powerful. And what of the king? He left the Vatican just as quietly as he had arrived, his face a perfect polished mask of royal composure. The press swarmed him like insects, shouting questions. "Your Majesty, an insult? Your Majesty, what is your response?" He ignored them all, his training holding firm. But later that evening, reports began to surface from deep inside the palace walls. The king did not rage, he did not throw things, he did not demand an apology from the Vatican. He was instead profoundly thoughtful, unsettled. He reportedly stood in his private study for a very, very long time, simply looking out the dark window, speaking to no one. The man who had entered the Vatican that morning, so full of certainty and his place in the world, was not the same man who left. The foundation of his world had been shaken. Finally, he turned to his most trusted senior aide, his voice not angry, but quiet, and full of a new, strange curiosity. He didn't speak of his own humiliation. He didn't speak of the insult. He asked a simple, profound question, a question that proved perhaps he was beginning to understand. He said, "Find out who she was. I want to know that woman's name." In that moment, King Charles realized the fundamental, earth-shattering truth. The audience, the cameras, the history of the day. It had never been about him at all. In the days that followed, the world waited. It held its breath, expecting something, an explanation, a justification, at the very least, a carefully worded diplomatic apology. The press screamed for an answer, but from the Vatican, there was only silence. Pope Leo the Fourteenth never gave an official explanation. He never released a statement. The Vatican press office, when hounded by reporters, simply said, "The Holy Father's actions speak for themselves." And they did. The Pope simply went about his business. He visited the sick in a hospital on the edge of Rome. He held his regular audiences. He prayed. He knew he didn't need to explain. He didn't need to clarify. His actions had spoken a truth louder than any sermon, more powerful than any encyclical, more lasting than any press release. Let us think truly one last time about what we saw. The hand that the Pope refused to shake was a hand that was full. It was overflowing with worldly power. It was full of inherited privilege, of centuries of history, of command and authority. It represented a life that had never known true need, a hand that never had to ask, only to receive. It was, in its own way, a hand that was full of itself, accustomed to being taken, accustomed to being obeyed. It was a hand that had everything the world values, but the hand he chose to honor, the hand of that widow from the mountains, that hand was empty. It was so profoundly empty. It was empty of wealth, empty of status, empty of political power, empty of any earthly importance whatsoever. It was a hand defined by what it did not have. It was a hand that knew only how to cling to a broken rosary, how to serve others, how to wipe away its own tears, and how to lift itself in prayer when no one else was watching, by choosing the broken rosary over the royal ring, by choosing the threadbare shawl over the ermine robe. Pope Leo the Fourteenth reminded the entire world of an eternal, simple, and revolutionary truth. It is a truth we all know deep in our hearts, but one we so often forget because the world is so loud, so bright, so busy, distracting us. With thrones and celebrities and billionaires and crowns, he reminded us that God does not build his house in the gilded halls of power. He does not seek the approval of kings or presidents or the wealthy. He is not impressed by our titles, our medals, or our bank accounts. He builds his home in the hearts of the humble. He is found in the quiet faith of those who suffer, those who serve, and those who pray when they have nothing left but prayer. And that day, the most powerful man in the world showed us all where true royalty lies by kneeling before it.